Hi, Marillea. Welcome to the Good Mood Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Yeah, thanks for joining. Yeah. So you have a focus in environmental medicine. You're a naturopathic doctor. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, I don't know. Before we started recording, I was telling you I'm kind of like frightened of environmental medicine as a topic. Just because I'm like, is this just going to be me learning that we've emerged as a species from the primordial soup to end up in a chemical soup and everything is hopeless and we're just full of toxins? Or I don't know, what's the story?
Yeah, so I've been working on my messaging around that a lot because that's one of the challenges that people who work, with the focus of environmental medicine in mind, when they, try to talk about that, it can go very doom and gloom quickly. So and that's not what you want because people have enough that they're worried about. But also it is a very real challenge that people need to be addressing. Right. So, so I've been a naturopathic doctor for a while now. I think I'm like almost 10 years now. Yeah. So, um, and so I got into naturopathic medicine because I also was exposed to conventional medicine to some degree. I was, for a short period of time, I was an EKG tech.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Interesting.
so just like 2 or 3 years. It was in between undergrad and when I decided to go to naturopathic medicine. So in that occupation, you're seeing a lot of people. We're getting referrals from medical doctors because there have been cardiac irregularities. People have fainted, lost consciousness, chest pain, things like that you wouldn't really expect. Our patients, referrals were usually older people, but we also got some young people as well. What I found very common with especially the older ones was like, okay, so we have to take a list of their medications and they're bringing in like large bags of medications. It's like, okay, this is for my this, but this is for this, and then this is because this medication hurts my stomach, right? So
It's like I have medications to treat my medications.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I was like, okay. I also grew up in kind of a naturopathic household. Um, so I knew at that point that, we had other options, right? People do need medication sometimes. And then sometimes there's things that you can do that may prevent them from needing medication. So there was that part. And then once I got into naturopathic medicine, I was talking to a number of people who were like, would be considered elders, or, they've been in the profession for a while. And someone brought up the point that a lot of conditions are becoming harder to treat, right? And part of that is because we're exposed to so much more than we were, generations ago, right? And even for the ones that did homeopathy, they were realizing, comparison probably from like reading, previous studies or reports, that it became more challenging to treat homeopathically. Like either they had to find more remedies or switch remedies more often, and part of that seems to be because with industrialization that happened, like, well, it's been happening since the 1800s, but like more in the like since like the 1940s, like early 90s, there's been a lot more advancements since then. And then with a lot of these advancements come a lot of pollution, right? And then a lot of new chemicals, new compounds that are released into the environment as maybe like a byproduct of manufacturing, or just as part of the products that are being marketed towards us, right? So that all affects us. Um, and also I found, like, as I've looked into environmental medicine and a lot of social issues as well, there's a lot of tie-in to environmental medicine, environmental racism, and um, and just like a lot of social issues that we're experiencing. So that also kind of increased my interest in it, and like doing something or raising awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's a lot behind my interest in environmental medicine, is the too long didn't read sort of version.
It's like, yeah, it's coming from a lot of places. So it's
Yeah.
like begins with this curiosity, like being raised in a household that favored more of like a natural way to heal
Yeah.
ailments or disease, and just live more in alignment with nature, and then seeing people who are coming in for heart exams, like echocardiograms, who are just on bags of medications, and thinking like, does it have to be this way? In some cases, yes, people need medications, like you said, but does someone need like medications to treat side effects of medications that then treat the side effects of those medications until you're in like a hall of mirror of medications with no way out? And then can you speak about the home? So you're saying exposure to certain environmental toxins was preventing homeopathic remedies from working, or it was just delaying someone's ability to feel better with the treatments that would have worked before? Like, what were you seeing there, and why would that be the
Well,
case?
yeah. So I'm not a classical homeopath. Um, it's a lot of work. It's not something that I think it's
Yeah.
fascinating, right? It's amazing, and I don't have it in me. There are some people who are amazing at it. That's not me. But I've talked to some other practitioners who've been around for a while. Some of them create their own formulations, and that's kind of a trend that they've seen. It's been a little bit more challenging. I'm like, it may not be what other homeopaths, kind of agree with, but it's just something that I found of note um, when talking to those particular practitioners with their experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it may not be an opinion or an observation of most homeopaths, but I just thought it was something interesting. And it did kind of make sense if you're looking at, you know, how prevalent chronic disease is now, and also at what age people are starting to kind of exhibit signs and symptoms of chronic, like the myriad of diseases that we would consider chronic illnesses.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And it makes sense. Like, if homeopathy is supposed to boost our body's own natural capacity to heal,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of like, how our body wants to heal a broken bone, homeopathy can kind of accelerate that process. But if there's an obstacle to cure, I guess we say in our
Yeah.
field, if there's an obstacle cure, like a I don't know, like some sort of environmental toxin that's confusing the body, it may block that ability. So you're giving a homeopathic remedy to try and accelerate this natural healing process, and the body's confused and doesn't know how to bypass this thing that's in the way, especially if it's a kind of a new chemical that it hasn't been exposed to or learned how to like evolve around or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like when I use homeopathy, it's usually a complex remedy, just
Mm-hmm.
maybe to make it a bit easier on myself. And if you think about it, what are we being exposed to
Mm-hmm.
that we've never had to take into account before in like the history of medicine,
Yeah.
right?
Right. And my understanding is like we're all exposed. Like, I sort of tell this to patients, especially when I'm talking about hormonal things, like, because someone's like, well, how come all of my friends and I all have hormonal issues, like heavy periods or painful periods or fibroids or just what have you? Or
Mm-hmm.
why are all of my friends and I and peers going through horrific perimenopausal symptoms? And so we talk about hormone disruptors and a little bit, because again, I'm also like, what do I say about like, and my thoughts are usually like, it's, you can be pretty pure, I guess, like trying to avoid the environmental toxins as much as possible, but there's just like I don't know. I just have this bleak outlook about it. Like it's in our drinking water. Like, you know, this idea of like our oral contraceptives are not removed from the water supply. And so it's just circling back. And so we're basically taking birth control against our knowledge or whatever, like my understanding is of the chemicals in our environment. But yeah.
Yeah, like there is a lot in the drinking water that you just can't filter out. Um, it may like, you know, our we're lucky our drinking water is safe to drink. But then after that part, after that basic requirement, there's a lot that's still in the water that still does have an effect. And it doesn't affect all of us in the same way because we're all like genetically unique from each other, right? So that's another part that plays in to the whole environmental medicine approach. It's like the effect of the environment and the genetics on your health.
Right. And how, yeah, some people may be more just genetically resilient. Then you're also mentioning that these chemicals are not, they're not egalitarian. Like they will affect certain communities far more than others. Like when you were mentioning, there's sort of an inherent racism in environmental medicine. Maybe you can say more about that. Like,
well, it's not so much. Well, it's not so much the medicine itself, but I mean, I think in certain things, like what I'm also seeing in some communities, or I guess not. When I say communities, I mean like medical communities, where we're starting to look at things like statements like, okay, you know, the Black population is more genetically susceptible to X, Y, Z, right? And you kind of stop at that, right? But what we've been finding is, or like if you look at the communities, what are the conditions that they're living in? That, and then those conditions make them more susceptible to X, Y, Z versus their race makes them more susceptible, right? Like, if you have a scope that's this big and you just kind of look at one part and you just kind of keep it limited like that, you can make any conclusion you want, right? You just have to either expand the scope or, you know, point it in the right direction.
Right.
Because I was reading this book called The Autoimmune Epidemic. I'll show you.
Yeah.
Here it is. Probably like in reverse because of the recording, but it's a really good book, and also Dr. Krinian's clinical environmental medicine book. So actually some of the studies were like they were both used in the different books. So one of them is a textbook, the other one is more of like a journalistic sort of a book, and they were looking at the rates of lupus in a certain area. So there was that one situation. Then there was another situation where they were looking at rates of another type of autoimmune disease in a different area. And then they found that it was a predominantly Black area. But then when they looked at the conditions in which these people were living, so in one area, everyone was getting lupus, right? Like men, women, like young women, like around the age of puberty, and it was awful. And they found out when they did some digging is that the community was built on basically a toxic waste dump that no one told the residents about, and that when it came time to clean up, they said, we don't have the funds. And then in the other situation, also predominantly Black community, also living very close to where they were doing a lot of manufacturing or industry, right? So they're being allowed to or forced to live in areas where they would be more exposed to toxins, right? And then I was also reading another book called I think it's called Invisible Women. So a lot of the what it looks like is that certain populations are much more vulnerable to toxic exposure because of maybe where they live, right? Or their age. Like children are a little bit more vulnerable because, you know, they eat a lot, they crawl on the ground, they put things in their mouths, they put their mouths on things, you know.
Right.
And also because they eat so much, if you're not feeding them organic food, they're just constantly like consuming a lot of pesticides, you know. So and they're so small and they are in such rapid like a stage of rapid development.
They also have more like body fat, and that body fat gets turned into like their actual body. Like they kind of store fat and then they grow, then they store fat, and we know that like fat accumulates toxins more than other tissues.
Oh, well, yeah. And also it's harder to get rid of.
Right.
Too. Yeah, well, because it accumulates, right? Yeah. So well, in Invisible Women, they were showing that so it's basically another like journalistic book where well, part of it where that just kind of struck me was in a lot of cases it was women who were doing certain jobs that exposed them to environmental toxicants like BPA, right? Or like different solvents because they were like they tended to do jobs where like if you're doing nails, right, there's a lot of toxic fumes. If you're doing a lot of like the housekeeping in hotels, you're exposed to a lot of cleaning fluids that are really toxic. And a lot of these jobs are like lower paying. And a lot of these jobs, you know, fall to people who are less educated and other, you know, other less advantaged conditions. And so a lot of times they're not going to know, oh, you know, you should be wearing, you know, more protective equipment, right? They may not be told, or they may be disregarded, or, you know, in order to get the job done more efficiently, they may pass on certain, you know, personal protective equipment, right? Depending on the demands of their job, or, you know.
And like the larger like agencies or companies often don't acknowledge the harm of those chemicals, especially because it seems like the effects are more long term. Like you can feel sick in the immediacy of being exposed to certain chemicals, but a lot of it is like, well, I feel fine when I'm exposed to this random solvent, but it's more about like the long stream effects, like 5 years, 20 years later, that they can cause over like repeat exposure. And often that's, I mean, you'll probably say more about this, but it's just often not studied, and people like gaslit, like, oh, it's fine. In our 4-week study, living on a toxic dump didn't do anything to people's health. It didn't cause lupus, but you're like, but that's like 10 years later or generations later, it does. But nobody is examining that long-term effect, maybe.
Yeah, so I have so many opinions on all of that. But yeah, like the way that chemicals are often studied to determine their safety is one at a time. But the reality is you don't ever use a single chemical. Like if you pick up a bottle of whatever, there are at least, like depending on if it's a conventionally, you know, used product, there are a lot of chemicals in that, right? And they haven't been tested together, right? Because that's not how things are tested. And if they did test them together, they would probably find a synergistic effect, you know, a detrimental effect. It would probably be worse, and it would probably happen faster than if you tested one single, you know, toxicant. Right? So the way that they test things is not necessarily applicable to the way that it affects us, right? And it doesn't take into account what we're already being exposed to.
Right.
Right.
And it's usually like with animals, and they're just like, how much of this toxin is needed to, like, this is morbid, but like kill the animal. And it's like, that's not really like that. It's not like you're just in a room breathing in this glue until you feel sick. It's like you're exposed to tiny amounts of it over time. It's very different, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So Also, like I think if people became more aware of certain things and they kind of, they voted with their dollar,
Mm.
let's say, okay, like I think a lot of times the challenges that we have when we talk about the subject is it can be overwhelming. Um, but also there's a lot of hype around it, right? It's like either it's like if you look at social media, it's either like, this one juice cleanse is going to help, cleanse you, and that's all you have to do, right? Or it's like, do you have a liver? Do you have kidneys? You're fine. You don't need to detox, right? It's like one or the other. And people are like, well, are like, did you die? Right? So it's like, no, you're not dying. You didn't die. You're like, I mean, it didn't kill you, that exposure, that daily exposure, but it's not helping you.
Mm.
And a lot of us are fairly healthy, so we can tolerate exposure here and there. It doesn't help us, but you're not going to notice it right away.
Mm.
So one is like, I've had a number of patients and I've talked to a number of people who fall under the category of like having multiple chemical sensitivities, right? So those people would, like, they may be accused of, faking their illness or being overly dramatic, just essentially being told that, their condition is not valid,
Right.
right? Because they can't, like, they'll be like, oh, I can't go out, I can't go to that location because, there's like, I can't go into that store because of all the smells that are in it, right? Like, they'll get headaches, they may even have seizures or some sort of allergic reaction. So not only like will they not, you won't see them out, so you won't see these people out in the places that, we have no issues being around, right? They're kind of fortunate in a way, like not really, because they are in so much pain and discomfort, but because they are so sensitive, they know when to stay away from something.
It's a canary in the coal mine, like
They are our canaries in the coal mine, and they are an indication of what we need to stop doing, really. So for me, I value these people. I mean, you should value people anyway, but for the input that they are providing, like, they are showing us, how bad it could be for all of us, right? And it just kind of like, it just really irritates me so much when people are like, well, that doesn't bother me, so they go out and they spray themselves with cologne, right? And you're like, well, okay, but this is a problem for other people and totally not necessary. Plus, a lot of the chemicals that you find that create these smells are actually endocrine disruptors, right? So do you want that sprayed all over you?
Yeah, especially if the point of it is to like attract a mate. You're like, why would you want to
Right?
be disrupting the very pheromones that are gonna find
Yeah,
the right mate chemically?
yeah. And I think also because it's the marketing that we're exposed to is very misleading,
Yeah.
right? Or it focuses so much on certain things and doesn't tell you at all, what's actually in this. Like, I mean, I love those what is it, the Old Spice commercials with the guy like, I'm on a horse. Right? I love them, they're hilarious. And then, or like the Axe commercials, they're funny, they're really funny. I don't like the body spray because it's so bad for you.
Right.
Right? But no one's going to be like, okay, what is in that body spray? They're just going to be like, oh my God, that's a hilarious, commercial. I want to be just like him. I want a horse, and, and I'm going to buy this
And I
because
want
of
to smell good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And look like Isaiah. I don't remember what his last name is, but yeah, like, the guy that,
Right.
right. Or just have that like kind of appeal.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, one of our challenges is also like understanding the marketing that goes into pushing these products that are actually really bad for you.
There's like a sense of betrayal I feel a lot when I grocery shop or look at, like, I need a deodorant or something, and I'm looking at ingredients just kind of like, what? Like, a good example that really irked me one time, I was looking for coconut milk, and I was in a grocery store with more limited options. You know, sometimes you go to grocery stores that have a entire aisle of coconut milks, and I think the only kind that was available at this grocery store was a brand that the ingredients were like coconut, water, polysorbate 60, and like all these other like random. And it's like, why does it, and you know, very many other brands just have coconut milk and water, and it separates. You have like a hunk of coconut at the top and then water at the bottom. And it's
Okay.
like, that's just how it works when you mix fat and water, it separates. So I guess polysorbate 60 somehow preserves it, or, and then, you know, coconut is pretty well preserved in a can because it's saturated fat, so it doesn't go rancid too easily. So you don't really need a preservative. So this sort of unnecessary chemical that I guess enhances palatability or the texture, does something that that may seem desirable in some way, maybe saves the company money, maybe saves us money, or, but from my perspective, I was like, oh, it's so unnecessary. Why do you have to add? And I think I studied that chemical like very quick, like briefly, and it was disrupt the microbiome and does a lot of things that aren't great for us. It's just, and it was just like, why? Just give me coconut and water and give me peace.
I know that's all I ask, right? Just coconut and water, and
Just
I'll just
coconut
shake
and
it
water.
myself. It's fine.
Yeah, I'll pay more for less, which is
Yeah,
literally the case.
yeah, like yeah. So like there's so many challenges like that there, right? Where for us, it's something that we kind of accept. Like we will pick up the can of whatever and look at it because whatever we want happens to be in a can at that moment, right? And you know, we just for us it kind of becomes part of part of our lives. This is what we do, right?
Like our worldview, we're sort of like kind of trying to weed out chemicals as we move through life.
Yeah, yeah, like it's kind of a minor inconvenience, but like for some people they don't like people aren't really savvy when it comes to reading labels, and a lot of these labels have a lot of like you need a chemistry degree to get through them.
And why wouldn't you trust whoever put that on the shelf, right? Like, why wouldn't that be the default to
Right.
say, whoever allowed this to be on the shelf, and there's many layers of people from governments to the company to the grocery store, why does it have to be up to me to weed these things out of my life if they're bad for my health? Why isn't anyone protecting me? Why do I have to be a science expert to not be exposed to stuff that's going to hurt my health, right? Like, there's also that where it's like, why aren't there more structures in place to keep that stuff out of our lives, which is frustrating to me, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I mean we can probably go into a whole other tirade as to what is actually going on. But we can save that for another day. But it is, yeah, like why can't we just go about our lives and have the best provided for us, I guess, or like the least harmful, or however you want to state it. Yeah, because like most people don't have time to read to get a chemistry degree so they can understand what's in their packaging, right?
Mm.
And then the other challenge is also in some cases people don't have the time to cook or whatever, right? Like if you wanted to do something all more natural, if you wanted to know what was actually in your food, you would have to like, I mean, you'd have to grow it yourself first of all, but then you would have to like take this fresh produce and prepare it yourself, right? And a lot of people are busy and they don't necessarily have the time to do that.
Right. And yeah, it's like I don't have a coconut tree and like a machete, and like I'm not grinding coconut meat and making my own just so I can make a stir fry. You're
Yeah,
like, there's,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
This is a small convenience I'd like to allow into my life without having to pay
yeah,
for it, in
yeah,
terms of health.
yeah, yeah.
Which
So
is,
like,
yeah. I'm like, it's not a big ask, is it? Yeah, but this is the thing.
well, and the thing is, I was talking to a friend about this the other day about how, okay, like right now, or maybe I was reading an article and then talking about it, but it's like a lot of times organic, better quality food is considered a luxury
Yeah.
because, it does cost more, right? And I think, that there was the statement that if people lean more towards organic, then it would become more accessible
Mm.
in the long run, which would be great. But it's also, okay, why isn't it accessible now?
Mhm.
There's that part. And also, like, let's say my sister was complaining about this one time too. Like, if I want to go into a restaurant and order something gluten-free, why does it cost more? Especially like, what if I had celiac? Like, I just order stuff gluten-free anyway.
Mhm.
But like, what if I had celiac? Why am I paying more so that, I need to be accommodated for this thing that's a real issue,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So
You're right. It's like the momentum of like common practices
yeah.
that I find very frustrating. Like as someone kind of on the fringe, like naturopathic medicine, we're sort of like living in a fringe world, which I could say more about that. Every time I walk into a Shoppers Drug Mart trying to find like, I don't know, something for heartburn, I'm like, why is this whole shelf just like Tums and Zantac when DGL is
Yeah.
cheaper, tastes better, all overall better for you? It's
Mm.
literally like eating chocolate candy, and it's not available here. So like those kind of things where you're just like, why aren't things just done in a way that's more efficient and better overall? But there's like these things that just happen because they've always been done,
Mm-hmm.
and we accumulate information that's like, okay, this isn't great. It's very difficult to like change course, I think, in a lot of cases. So if they're like, well, I always serve, I mean, bread is always made with wheat or whatever, we always just throw flour in this thing to thicken it.
Mm.
And you're like, but I don't care about the texture of the sauce. I just want it to be gluten free
Yeah.
as per my own preferences. And yet now I need to pay more because, yes, the chef has to make a whole new dish and
Mm-hmm.
prevent it from being contaminated with any flour, and it's more effort.
Mm-hmm.
So you pay more, but then it ends up, harming the person who's celiac, who's like, I can't be in contact with gluten. It's
Yeah.
not, you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So like, yeah, in terms of like environmental medicine and the whole avoidance thing, I think, yeah, like it can get doom and gloom very fast, or you can just get really angry depending on, how you feel about things.
Or the time of day you're having, the type of day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, damn
Yeah.
coconut milk. Okay.
Right. But um, I think there's a lot that we can do.
Mhm.
Um, it doesn't have to be a huge thing that you do. Like, so for myself and for people who like for yourself and our other colleagues, this has become a way of life for us,
Mhm.
right? This is just how we live our lives, and that's why it may appear easy to a lot of other people. But also, we've been lucky to have the type of education that will allow us to access this information, and and it has become a priority for us just because of our health goals, and just maybe who we are as people, who knows. But there are many factors, and I think that like for me, part of it has been um, understanding that not everyone sees things in that way right now,
Yeah. Right.
right? And some people might not ever. They might be like, okay, that's cool, or it just might take up too much bandwidth for them, and it's not a concern for them. So I guess the challenges include making, like kind of figuring out how to work with people in terms of, okay, like where do we start? So I think the knowledge piece is really important. Um, and not everyone has to be all riled up about, the social issues associated with like a lot of stuff that concerns, myself personally, and a number of other, colleagues of ours. But I think that understanding that even though there's a lot out there, every little bit that we try to do matters, like for ourselves, right? Like, let's say, okay, so like there was a study done. It's funny that you were talking about cans, but so like canned soup, right? So they were doing an experiment just to see how much, like the effect of BPA when people were eating canned soup. So it did show up in their urine, which also meant that it was excreted to some degree. Like if stuff shows up in your urine on testing, it means your body is getting rid of it, right? So that's good. But it also showed that chemical increased in their body when they ate soup from a can. So, that's interesting to know. So maybe not so much canned soup all the time, right? There's some times where you do need to eat out of a can, because maybe you don't have time to actually make, homemade soup, right? That's fine. And not beating yourself up over that, right? Because, like doing what you can is important, and just kind of throwing everything away because you can't do that one thing is not going to be beneficial.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a very nuanced place, right? It's like first awareness that, okay, canned soup contains BPA. BPA, as far as we know, is not good for us. Second is like the empowerment of like, okay, if I've been having canned soup has been a practice in my family, and now what? So now you're telling me I got to make my own soup. Okay, how do I do that? How do I find the time? What do I buy? Like, there's that empowerment piece. And then almost like you're mentioning this acceptance piece of like, it's probably not possible to completely eliminate BPA from your life. And there's going to be cans in your life. It's just, there will be cans in the future. So also like this really delicate place I find of like, okay, I'm going to be exposed to it. It's not good. I can try and minimize my exposure or reduce it. And there's this balance of like, and I can always sort of move further in the direction of avoiding it, just depending on these other factors: time, money, knowledge, ability, what's even within my control, and like holding that of like, I'm doing the best I can kind of energy, which is a difficult place to be in when we are like often in the initial stages. There's horror at, whoa, okay, so you're saying this canned soup I've been having my entire life may be affecting my hormones. And it's like, that can be a difficult place to sit in for a while, but then like hopefully we reach this stage where we're like feeling empowered and able to work with what's in our control and like let go of what's not in our control. It's tough though.
Yeah, so for sure. And then like also with the BPA, having BPA free cans is not that much better either, right?
Really?
Because sorry.
Yeah, right. So then it's like, okay, yeah.
So like
acceptance, dialing up the acceptance a bit more.
Yeah, so with the BPA free thing, they've replaced it with other types of bisphenol things that aren't as heavily studied yet, because they're relatively new. So they don't know if it's better or worse, or just a lateral move. But they don't tell you what's in it that makes it BPA, like, instead of BPA free, they still need to put something in there, right? Like to replace that particular thing. So
it's like the further, like there's a bit like just heading further in the direction of doom and gloom, this concept of greenwashing, like I think what you're mentioning now, which is like the BPA free cans, and so you grab it like, okay, great, but then they're adding other things, they're not acknowledging that there was already, it's kind of like gluten-free Skittles, and you're like, yeah, but there was never gluten in these things. And it's a non-starter. You're like, it doesn't say anything. Like you just added something to the package that was completely irrelevant. But even beyond that is like, like, I don't know, I'm looking for dish soap, let's say, and it's like 80%, it'll say something like biodegradable or 80% naturally derived ingredients. And then you read the ingredients and you're like, these seem like they're not that, like, I don't recognize these names. These all sound like a chemical source book for like a chemistry lab.
Yeah.
And yet so like, do I feel better about buying this product or just go with Dawn, like everybody else? Or I guess that, what should like we be aware of in terms of that idea of like greenwashing or health washing of?
Well, I know, like the BPA free thing, definitely. There are other alternatives that can be used instead. So I'll usually, like for water, I'll use like stainless steel or glass, right? Depending on what I'm doing. I may not take glass to the gym, right? So I'll take stainless steel. But something like that, right? Like I've reused mason jars because they're fantastic. Or like going into, if you have to eat something that's packaged, going into like something that's packaged in glass, right? Because you can get soup in mason jars in the refrigerated section, and there may be a little bit of BPA in it because like in the cover, but it's much less than the whole soup coming into contact with it because it's surrounded by a can, right? Even these things will reduce your exposure. And I think
for the environment too, which is part of us.
And then like reusing those jars after for other things, which would be great, and keeping them out of the landfill. So like part of environmental medicine, like for me, is also seeing how you can reduce the detrimental impact that you may have on the environment, right? Because a lot of these, and also for me, it's been reducing my consumerism, right? Because a lot of the chemicals that are found in the environment, let's say things like, I know for you with this good mood, with the Good Mood podcast, like you're very interested in things that affect your mood, right? So a lot of the pollution that is found in our air and water are they can cause neuroinflammation, which then contributes to mood issues and like cognitive decline and things like that, right? So things like trying to reduce our pollution, which is usually tied to how much we buy or how much, what we want to acquire in our lives, right? So there's that. And then or how much we're driving or whatever, right?
Like trying to reduce our impact. And one of my friends in college just was there, well, there's something circulating around Facebook. It's like this idea of normalizing secondhand gifts for kids, which is great for like just reducing landfill, Fisher Price, or whatever kids get, I don't know. And but there's also this idea of like, if those toys contain chemicals, when they're older, they've been off-gassed. And so it's kind of sad to think that the child that owned the toy when it was new, it was exposed to all the chemicals. But when it's second, third hand, it's a little bit more benign as a substance, and so less potential for toxic exposure as well. So you're like, by recycling something, you save money, you keep things out of landfills by giving them, a new person to love them. So like watching Toy Story 3 and like reinvigorating your like need for like spreading like giving toys a new person to love. And then you're also reducing the chemical exposure of the person. So there's like all these kind of benefits to recycling and to minimizing consumerism.
And there are some really cute like baby outfits, because like babies tend to outgrow things before they wear them out. And I actually got a few things for my nephew, and I got some pretty cool, and they're cheaper too, right? Like I got this this onesie that had like a felted Mr. T on it.
Oh my God, really?
It was the best. Yeah, it's the cutest.
That's
Like
so
you find cool stuff like that, right?
like this like weird vintagey. Yeah.
Yeah, like my brother-in-law was like, "Oh, that's cool." Then my sister, who's a little bit younger than me, was like, "Who is that?" And this is like, plus she wasn't into that when we were younger anyway. So
Mr. T.
Mr. T, yeah,
Yeah, that's
he's
amazing.
super cute. But yeah, like, um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of, and it also lets the industries know what our priorities are, if that's something that is a priority for us,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
To because like, you know, the particulate matter, like there have been a number of studies done like in Mexico, in Asia, in parts of Asia, where the higher that the particulate matter, they found a correlation, which is not necessarily causation yet, but it's still concerning. The higher levels of particulate matter in the air, which would come from like burning things and like driving, was found to be correlated to higher rates of depression
Mm-hmm.
or and like learning disabilities in children,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and there's so many studies like that,
Mm-hmm. So the
right?
idea
Showing.
of, yeah, like we know that depression and mood issues are ultimately, like if we can boil it down to one causal, like um, physical causal relationship, it's something about inflammation in the brain. So this
Mhm.
connection of it could be the chemical exposure that leads to that neuroinflammation
Yeah.
that then
So,
ultimately shows up as mood conditions. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, that, and then like various heavy metal exposures.
Mm-hmm.
Mercury is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, like
so,
the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland's classic example, because didn't they wear mercury infused hats or something? So there's this trope
uh,
of like the
mhm,
guy wearing the hat is always a little bit
a little bit off.
mad.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they use mercury to like treat the skin or the to make the leather or something. So they were always exposed to it. And
Yeah.
yeah, and so they're both like usually a little bit off, right? And then now with the pollution, right? Like you're getting mercury and it's like falling into the oceans and it's getting bioaccumulated as you go up the food chain or the food web, right? So people are like, "Oh, tuna is such a great source of protein." You're like, "Yes, and it's really high in mercury and PCB, right? Which
Mhm.
is not something that you want to be eating a lot of."
Yeah, I
Right?
think I remember in one of our classes, in Japan, there was a region, I don't know a lot, but I don't know all the details, but in Japan, there's a region that's like just culturally um, a higher consumption of whale meat, which obviously like a larger animal is going to accumulate more mercury or more toxins from the oceans and the fish that they consume.
Mm-hmm.
And in the town, lots of like neurological conditions, and there's some protests as well in the region,
Mm-hmm.
where they're trying to like end whalery, is that even it, like whale
Whaling,
fishing
I
or
think.
whale
Yeah.
hunting, yeah. But it's a delicacy, and runs um, through generations and things like that. But it's, yeah, like a lot of these neurological conditions from just the consumption of mercury. And but I think, yeah, what you're also saying is like it's a product of like industrialization, so it could be in our like in our lakes, in our oceans,
Mm.
and um yeah.
Yeah. So like for a lot of people, especially like maybe if they have like mood disorders, looking at the quality of their air, getting a good filter, at least for their bedroom when they're sleeping, um, right? Because as as we know, and as more information is coming out, is sleeping. When you're sleeping, is like the time when your body's healing, and also when it's most vulnerable to a lot of things
Yeah.
as well, right? Like, um, so if you need to have a filter, if you can have a filter just in one room of your house, it would be your bedroom, and you'd be running that when you're sleeping,
Mm-hmm.
or put it on wheels and take it around the house with you. um, because that will make a difference. You may not notice it, but a lot of times I think the challenge is also people are like, well, I didn't notice a difference.
Right.
But we know, but part of it is because, your body's so good at buffering
Right.
that, and it's, that whatever trying to do falls within that window of you probably won't feel it, but it actually will be quite beneficial for you. And then, you go on to the next thing that, will make a difference, but they may not notice as well. Or also a lot of people they're not really, we haven't been taught to really listen to our bodies. Right. So when I'm like, okay, well, I'm feeling this way, my body is doing this. I know that if I eat this, this is going to happen. And I'm not a fan, but I really like that thing. So I'm going to eat it anyway. And it's just these little things. Whereas, maybe a family member will be sitting there eating, I don't know, like sandwiches made with white bread and a bunch of other things, stuff that I typically don't consume on a day-to-day, and they may think that they're okay.
Yeah.
Right. But it also depends, because we also know that once we've taken away all of these offending items, people become more sensitive, right? Like when you do the elimination diet and people are like, oh, I feel better. And then they try to reintroduce and then they hate you.
Right.
Right. They're
What
like,
did
oh
you do
no,
to
I
me?
can't eat this. I know, like, I can't eat this anymore. And I'm like, you probably shouldn't have been eating that in that amount in the first place. But but you're just like, oh, okay.
Right. But there's so much of that. Like, I think a big part of it is like, it's tough to learn that. It's kind of like with the coconut milk of like, why is this like available on shelves, and why has my family and I just thought it's been safe, and now I'm finding out that it's so harmful to me, so it's an easier explanation to be like, it's not right to take it out. Something was wrong with me taking it out, versus like, oh, it was never right to be kind of consuming it regularly for me, because it's like, now I have to question the whole system. That's really tough, I think. And then I think you were also mentioning this idea of like, our body is very resilient in buffers, and there's this idea I talk about with my patients a lot of like, when you add something that's not quite right, or like not helpful to an ecosystem, and our body is an ecosystem, the system finds a way to balance itself out and stabilize. But that stabilization may result in like just a mood that's lower than what you normally would experience if that chemical or that thing wasn't there. Maybe weight that's higher. Maybe you just feel more tired than you would if that chemical wasn't there. And you sort of are left with this idea of like, well, this is just me. Maybe it's just my genetics. Maybe I am just a little bit like, it's just harder for me to lose weight, or I just don't really have that much energy as a person, or I just am a little bit more pessimistic generally than I would like to be. But there's like a stability in that system. And then when you slowly start to remove the substance, and then things start to like change, but it takes a long time. It's kind of like, I think of like, you have a pond and you throw oil in the pond, and you're going to have like some fish dying, maybe some algae form or some weird thing, and then it's stable. And then you're like, well, how come there's not enough fish in this pond? Or why is there so much algae? And you try and kill the algae and it just goes back. You try and add more fish, the fish just die. But there's a stability there, even though it's suboptimal. And I think that's happening a lot with our health in general, our bodies. So you take out Wonder Bread and you feel better, and then you add Wonder Bread back in, and your body's like, what happened?
Yeah, and then they blame us.
Right, yeah, sometimes.
And I'm like, you know what, it's fine. Like, you get used to it after a few years. You're like, oh yeah, that's gonna happen. And sometimes you warn them, because it's happened so many times. You're just like, oh yeah, by the way, right? But I mean, I would, personally, I would rather know when something that I'm doing is not beneficial to me. Right? Yeah. And the fact is, a lot of people are just so inflamed that they think that that's what fine feels like. And yeah, like they've stabilized, right? Yeah. And then they don't know how good they could actually feel, right? And I think, yeah, like there's so much to it. Like there's like the social aspect of it, and like what we've been conditioned to believe or disregard, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Like, why is this being presented to us as something that we can consume,
Mm-hmm.
right? And obviously it's not killing us, so does that mean it's okay? Is there a better way of doing this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'd like to believe in most cases there are.
Mm-hmm.
um and sometimes, like with food, a lot of times, texture is such an issue, and they'll put a lot of like emulsifiers and stuff in it. Like that's probably what a lot of this stuff is, to keep the consistency consistent throughout everything, right?
Like shelf stability too, like so something,
Yeah,
bread doesn't have to be refrigerated or consumed same day. Like back in the day
yeah.
we used to buy a loaf of bread, eat it, and you wouldn't
Mhm.
have it in the fridge for weeks, or I don't even know how long bread lasts, but
Yeah, I don't know
like
either.
imagine Wonder Bread never goes bad.
Oh, Wonder Bread is so gross. Oh, it smells awful.
I used to roll it up into a ball when I was a kid, like, and it'd be this little
Yeah,
like golf ball size thing, and just eat it, and just
it's great.
dip it
I
in wine.
find. Oh,
'Cause-
really? Oh no. I feel like I'm like, I don't eat a lot of bread, but I like really good bread. Like if I go to a restaurant and I'm just like, oh, I want some of that
yeah,
with a lot of butter on it. But then Wonder Bread, I'm like, what is that? That's not right,
yeah, and yeah, our taste receptors adjust as well. Like I think that's
Yeah.
that. As a kid, I don't think I would have wanted a big dense loaf of sourdough, but now you're like, Wonder Bread isn't really bread when
Yeah.
you know, so something changes with our expectations about what food tastes like, or our taste receptors open up to the
Hmm.
world.
But I think it also, as for me, as I became aware of what else was out there in terms of food and wanting to improve my diet. Plus, I just love food in general. Like I love food. um, and like I love the variety of food
Mhm.
that is available. Like you know, and that wanting to try different things and having that experience also for me helped to open up my taste buds. I think I feel like they were pretty much ready to eat anything anyway. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah, like sour. And plus also the great thing about sourdough is that because it's fermented, um it's a lot more, like it's easier on the body,
Yeah.
right? And I remember fermented foods, there's one, I can't remember which actual bacteria it is, but it actually it's able to break down glyphosate, right?
Oh, wow.
So for like sourdough will probably cause less issues. If you have to have bread, have to.
Mhm.
Right, but yeah, like sourdough or anything fermented. Whoops, I almost fell off my chair. Sorry.
Just out of the
um,
excitement of this
yeah.
conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love sourdough. Yeah, so like there are better options, and for me, being mindful when I can, and um, prioritizing, or like having my diet be in line with my health goals 80% of the time. I don't want to say controlling my diet because that has such a negative connotation where you're like depriving yourself or whatever. A lot of it is also mindset, right? Like I'll be like, okay, well, okay, is this in line with my health goals,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Will something come up that's not in line with my health goals, but I absolutely need to put into my face, right? Like is there something coming up? Is there an occasion coming up where there will be cake and I will want some,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And yeah, like personally for me, I feel better physically and like mentally
Mhm.
when I am prioritizing, my food in line with my health goals,
Yeah.
right?
It's like there's like so many criteria through which we choose what to eat, right? It's like
Mhm.
because you're at a social situation, there's like a social component to it, convenience, taste, like what you actually want to eat or what you like. And then it's simply just adding health as another criteria. And sometimes health may like fall by the wayside when you're like at a Tim Hortons road stop and you're like, I just need to like put food in my face. Maybe health is like a factor because you're like, okay, what's the best thing I could order? Like that kind of keeps me somehow in alignment. But just like adding that extra layer of like, it doesn't have to be only about health, that you don't eat anything unless it's the purest, like, you know, created by monks in like a southern Italian town. It's never touched a chemical and whatever. It's only been blessed by goodness. Like it doesn't have to be that. You can also like put pie in your face, but it's having health as a component of food decision, and that's really it. And like you said, like so there are health goals that you have, and you try and stay in alignment with them, but also you probably don't eat things you hate every day. Like you eat things you like, and you also probably don't like, well, I don't know actually, but maybe you don't make everything from scratch and grow everything yourself and like grind your own, like churn your butter, and like, so there's also a convenience factor. And then probably when you're with family or friends, like if someone offers you something that's not 100% healthy, you're also kind of like, oh yeah, I'll eat some because like I love you and you put love into this cookie and whatever.
I've eaten things that aren't in line with my health goals because of social situations.
You're like, I love you so much, I'll eat glyphosate for you.
It happens. Right? I mean, you know, you have to find the balance. For some people it's not acceptable, right? Like there are some people who have the bandwidth to be like, you know, very strict with it, and that's them. But the majority of us do not have that bandwidth available to us. We don't have those resources, you know, and we have to work with that. Because actually there's, like, I always want to emphasize that there's a lot that we can do within what we are able to do. Right. Like, or within, you know, our actual limitations. I don't want to say limitations, but that's basically what it is. It's like, you know, and also like the whole, I try to be mindful of how I talk about things, like the language that I use, because that can have such a deep impact when you're communicating with people, right? Like to add things to your diet versus take them away, right? You add first, and then hopefully that'll be enough to crowd out the things that you would want to get rid of anyway, right? Or, you know, reduce the amount of that. But you know, like psychologically, you feel less deprived if someone's like, oh, add this into it. And you may not even notice that we've taken your bread out, right? Like, eat this first, and then you're like, oh, I'm too full for the
make a sandwich out of sourdough when you have your sandwich, and then it's just it's like in small changes that are like possible, you know, like having a direction. So instead of like take all these things out of your diet, good luck to you, it's like, okay, let's just start by adding this thing in every day. And then the person's like, okay, I know exactly what to do, where to buy it, how to do it. I feel good about it. And now I'm healthier and happy. And, you know, and I can maintain this. I feel like I could do this when I'm 80 years old, you know?
Yeah. For like a lot of people that we see, sometimes like that's just what it takes. A few manageable, you know, daily changes that eventually hopefully become habits. So they, you know, they take up less brain space, and they just get done. And then there are some patients where we're like, okay, you need to take out a lot more, right? Those are, but usually those people, those patients are feeling the fact that they need to take out a lot more. So it can be a bit more challenging, but you gotta, like, you know, everyone's different. Right? Some people can get away with a little bit more than others.
And what about this idea of like, so you mentioned earlier on about this idea of detox, like you need to drink celery juice every day, like do a detox cleanse, versus this other narrative that's like your body, your kidney, and like you have a natural detoxer all the time, which is your liver, and your liver detoxes everything. So you literally don't need to do anything. And you're like, okay. Very competing ideas.
So I've got I have opinions, but I I think that the whole thing where they're like, just do this juice cleanse and it'll be fine, or something along that lines, actually is problematic, because it has us believe that there's a quick fix for everything and anything, even our, you know, our poor health choices. Because some people they just do make poor health choices, either willfully or because they don't know any better. And then once they're not feeling great, they're like, oh, I can just do this and everything will be okay. And then I can go back to, you know, eating whatever and doing whatever, and this is all I need. Which is not true at all.
I was like, my family background is Catholic, and when I heard about celery juice in the morning, it just felt this very like philosophical. It felt a little bit like saying the rosary and doing like, because it was so specific. It was like, wake up at this time and 30 minutes before eating, prepare fresh organic celery and drink it like 2 hours before consuming food. And I'm just like, yeah, like, but because everybody eats celery, like most of us eat celery with like peanut butter and raisins on it, or chocolate chips, you know, as you do. Yes. And you know, we've been eating celery our whole lives, and like experience the health that we experience. So no one is like, oh, celery is the answer, but in a very specific way, yes, celery could be the answer, because it's like, oh, I've never had it like 2 hours, whatever the criteria was for it. I've never juiced 16 purely sourced celeries 2 hours before my food. So that's something new. But it's also, just, you know, you can be a mafia boss, but as long as you do this, you'll go to heaven kind of thing.
Right. Yes. That's so funny. I know my family background is also Catholic.
Right. So, you know, so there's this like energy.
Yeah. So it's like, and that's not how it works, actually. What actually happens to some people is that it actually pushes their pathways too quickly in a direction that they're not ready to have it go, right? Because your body, you know, like I said, your body buffers, your body accommodates, you know, your choices, or, you know, what happens to you, things like that. So when you're in a state of, you know, depletion or not optimal health, your body's kind of like, okay, well, maybe I'm going to pass on this particular function because we need to keep this person alive, or, you know, working a certain way, or we need to, you know, cut back on this because this other part needs to be optimized and I don't have the space for both, right? So a lot of times when people are very, like, let's just generally use the term toxic, because they've been exposed to a lot of things and they haven't been able to you know, get rid of it properly, all of a sudden deciding that you want to kick all that stuff out of the cells where they're being, you know, put away nicely for now, is not going to go over very well, right? So a lot of times when people want to do a detox, we work on other things before we actually try to push the cells to move things out of tissues. Right? Like you said, especially fat soluble toxins, they tend to be really awful. Like, I don't know if you've had patients where they want to lose weight quickly, right? Or they want to lose weight in general, right? Okay, so they've plateaued for years, or they've been able to lose, you know, a certain amount of weight in a short amount of time. And then they're like, I feel terrible, right? And you're like, well, that's because there are pathways that are not working properly, and you just pushed all of them, and now there's bottlenecks going on all over the place, right? So when I talk to my patients, I'm like, okay, if you want to do this, we have to basically prepare your body so that, you know, if you're in an apartment building and you have like a garbage chute, you gather your garbage, you know, tie up the bag, and then you go to the garbage chute and you open the garbage chute, and then you throw it in, right? Without the opening of the garbage chute, eventually just throwing the garbage against the door, you're going to have a worse mess than when you started.
Or like, right? If you don't tie the bag, it's like just garbage everywhere. And
if you don't tie the bag, if you keep trying to like throw it at the door, eventually the bag will break and you will have a much worse mess. because in the like in the beginning, when your body is like, okay, I don't know what to do with this, I can't get rid of it, but it has to be kept away from vital organs. I'm going to store it neatly and tidily in these compartments, and they're just going to stay there till I have time to deal with that. But what happens then is that you continue to be exposed, you continue to consume certain things, and then your body's like, I don't have time to deal with that because this is coming in. So that's where the avoidance key is important, right? Where you kind of like, okay, great, I'm not seeing this coming through anymore. Maybe I can work on something else, right? And then doing the celery juice for some people is like having people come in and be like, we need to get rid of this all now. And they just kind of like grab everything and throw it out the door. And the guy who's like, putting it away safely and tidily is like, what, what? That's not how this is good. Like, this is,
yeah, it's like you don't Marie Kondo your apartment during a garbage strike.
Yeah, right? Like that's what's happening. So, and trying to explain that to people so that they understand, right? Like, because sometimes you don't have time to explain all the different pathways, and you may not, be able to recite them off the top of your head at that time, right? Or you may, that's great, but they also may not need all that information. So,
yeah.
And then the whole kidney and liver thing is working, but are they working optimally? Right? Like, do you have issues with fatty liver either due to like metabolic issues, like blood sugar regulation issues, or even like exposure to certain chemicals will give you fatty liver?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and then it's this vicious cycle, and
and then is your body, like, if your body is at the right alkalinity, then you can actually get rid of more through your urine. Right? And then if your body's too acidic, well, your kidneys aren't working optimally anyway, because you haven't provided your kidneys with the conditions to work optimally with, right? Because there are studies where they've looked at the pH of your body and like the urine and the different parameters that they can look at, and they found that when your pH is more alkaline, your kidney can actually get rid of more things like mercury.
Oh, okay, right? That's so interesting.
But it's like, how do you get your body to be alkaline?
Right.
Like, there's that part, like, how do you go about doing that? And then if you extrapolate from that, what is it, like the things that you need to do to make your body consistently alkaline are actually in line with certain health goals, right? If you wanted better health, like, those are the things that you would do.
It's like lowering inflammation and consuming nutrients and
so like getting like your leafy greens in, getting your minerals, all that.
That's another point too. It's like nutrient deficiencies often, like I have a lot of patients who kind of live in this state of deficiency because they're scared of, I had a roommate in university and she was like, I can't eat anything. I'm like just going to leave my food on the balcony because refrigerators are horrible. And there was like this whole, which we can get there, right? Where it's like literally everything is dangerous. I'm going to just wear gloves, even though those are toxic too, and not touch anything and not eat anything. And so patients who are like, I'm just eating vegetables and rice, and it's like, great, so you're not eating like quote bad things, but we also need to get your nutrient levels optimized so that you can detox it, so that you can manage chemicals and alkalinize your body and things can work well, which is another component of it too. It's like, if we're deficient, how are things going to work,
like you still need protein to do things,
totally,
right? To do a lot of things. Like there's so much, pretty much everything. Like there's so much to that. So like with digestion, it's like, you need to be able to break down your food, and then you need to be, if your diet is very limited, like like eating foods that will provide you with the nutrients that you need, and then because that also shapes your microbiome, right? And then that also so that shapes the way that you can detoxify. And also with the the whole gut brain connection, that's also something to consider, right? And then like for the gut microbiome, if it's there'll always be like bad bacteria there, but it's the balance of having the good ones versus the bad ones, and then their ability to not break down what your liver just did, right? Like to detoxify hormones or hormone like compounds that will enter your body. So if if the bacteria would just leave those links alone so your body can get rid of it, right? Versus if you have a microbiome that supports the bacteria that will mess up everything that your liver did, well, you're just retoxifying yourself, right?
Right, like
So
especially like in the case of estrogen, where your body's trying to get rid of estrogens it doesn't need, and then the bacteria sort of turns it back on,
yeah,
gets reabsorbed,
yeah,
and then you have this cycle of constipation and hormone imbalance, and yeah, which causes
yeah,
more constipation, which causes more hormone imbalance, which causes yeah.
yeah. So things like that, and then also the same things that get rid of estrogens that will also get rid of like other endocrine disruptors,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then also like consuming less or being exposed to less endocrine disruptors will also help you with managing your hormone levels,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, and it doesn't take a lot of hormones to cause an issue.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. I know it's yeah. I
You know.
I know. It's yeah, how do you so we taught you like weaved in lots of good tips where it comes to like, let's see what we can kind of take out of the food supply in terms of like containers that our foods are in terms of products we might be exposed to, doing our best, but what are some like where would you start with someone? And I know that's obviously a very nuanced, it depends answer, as all ND answers should be.
Yes.
Everything depends. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, like if someone's coming in and they're like, I have depression, low energy, heavy periods, and just feeling kind of like the weather outside right now, gray, rainy, damp, and blah, like, and you're suspecting could be environmental toxicities playing a role. Um, yeah, or even just for the average person who's like, what do I do? How do I cleanse myself?
I mean, like it depends on a lot of things. So like you diet first, right? Always. Because there's probably stuff in there where, okay, I'm craving this and I'm eating a lot of that, right? Because a lot of times always that often comes up. So
Yeah.
trying to replace certain foods there, or looking at what kind of cravings they're having that may be pointing towards certain nutrient needs,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then also looking at what they're using in terms of food storage and how they're storing foods. Like sometimes storing in plastic is okay if you have something that's dry and it's not going to be, there's no liquid, there's no acid, it's not going to be touching the sides of the container, and don't microwave in plastic. Right, so changing like their food containers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then are they cooking on Teflon still? Right?
Yeah.
Are they still using Teflon? People still do that. And right, so
Of guilt. Sorry,
it's so
Father,
darn
I have
convenient,
sinned.
but
Yeah. Mm.
right, but um, maybe switching things over. Like I use cast iron. Um, I like it, and I do this thing where I wash it after I'm done, and then I heat it up, and then I season it with olive oil, and it's just my little post-cooking ritual. And I love doing it, just because I love my cast iron pan. Right? I have this love for my cast iron pan. It's really weird, but because I'm like, I know that this thing it's good for me, right? Like this is a great tool to have in your kitchen. It's so versatile. I can use a metal spatula on it and nothing happens,
Yeah.
right? And then it like sears the meat really well.
Mm-hmm. And you're
right?
getting iron from it.
Yeah, totally, because I actually could use a bit more iron in my life,
Same. Yeah.
right? And then I just have this ritual around it afterwards, right?
Mm.
Where I usually do not, unless it's too hot to handle, then I don't leave the kitchen without taking care of the cast iron.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then some people say that it's a pain and they don't want to do that, right? And like, everyone's different.
But you're like, it's just a natural expression of my cast iron love relationship.
Yeah, yeah, like we take care of each other, right?
Yeah.
And then like,
Yeah, it would
you know,
never be Marie Kondoed. You're like, it brings me joy.
it
So
does, it
days.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, and it's such a, like, I use it for everything.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that part too, right? Like, um, looking at, can they replace things with stainless steel or glass, like Pyrex,
Mm-hmm.
right, for cooking, um, because that will reduce their toxic load.
Those glass like Tupperware containers or mason jars, like you said, which you can
Yeah,
literally go to Goodwill and get packs of them used and use them for everything.
yeah.
And it makes your kitchen look cute. All your storage looks super organized and
Yes, you can put
fancy
labels on
and
those.
rusted. Yeah.
Make a day of it.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah, like I have this huge water, like my here it is,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
right? It used to have soup in it,
Mm-hmm.
and now I put water in it,
You
like
like
water,
upcycles things.
electrolyte.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
yeah. And then what else? Yeah. So if they're having issues with their period, so clearly there's a hormonal thing going on there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of skincare products are they using? Do they need to change those over? Because we absorb a lot through our skin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
So yeah, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, like, I mean, there's things like environmental working group to try and pick
Hmm.
better products but I mean, like so BB cream or like these kind of things where it's like, you're never going to get a really natural thing, but there are some companies that it might be greenwashing, but I wonder if some of these like, oh, it's mostly organic or it's got like, if that's a better option even, because sometimes, you know, shopping at a completely different store for beauty items and then spending money on something that then you don't like because you're trying to find the right one versus like, oh, I know I really like this item and it's got like a green label and maybe it's a bit better. Like, would you say like that's a step in the right direction, or is it kind of pointless
Well,
asking for a
it
friend?
yeah, it may be okay, right? Like it depends. There's an app called Think Dirty
Oh, cool.
that you can put on your phone and you can scan items and it'll tell you, um, you know, it'll give you an idea of what's in it
Safe
and how
dirty.
that maybe affect you. Yeah, Think Dirty. Let me
Think
see.
dirty. Okay, yeah, we'll put
Yeah,
that in the show notes. I think that's great. Yeah.
yeah, it's really great. And
So you can like quietly and discreetly evaluate your shopping without making
yeah,
a scene. You're just like, okay, let's see. And then you're like, nope, maybe
yeah.
not.
So yes, so it's still, there's a little bit of a challenge with it because sometimes you still kind of need to know chemistry a little bit, but um, yeah, I think it's pretty useful. A lot of people seem to like it. Um, and if that's something that you want to add to, like, like in terms of prioritizing in your life, especially like, women use, well, um, the whole beauty industry is marketed towards women for the most part. A little bit more for men now too, and they will also be, um, they'll also be subject to the same kind of endocrine disruptors that we will be, right? Possibly with, um, you know, well, with like male detrimental results,
Right.
right? Um, and then like kids, we're always putting stuff on kids' skin, right? Like you give them a bath and you put lotion on them, right? And you put like all over them. So And then their, like their surface area to baby ratio is really, really high, right? So that also,
They're
like I was
round.
talking about, yeah, and and they're small, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Surface area to
also
baby
like,
ratio. The best.
yeah, your surface, your skin surface to like actual person ratio is
Right.
really high.
Yeah. All the
So that
pimples.
kind of
Mhm.
kind of increases their susceptibility because they're
Mhm.
exposed to a lot more,
Mhm.
right? So I think that taking out, like looking for stuff that has less chemicals in it will be beneficial if you're not able to find something. Like if you insist on doing something and you can't find something that is as clean as you'd like it. But it also depends on which of the chemicals they're leaving in too, right? Like
Yeah.
they may be taking out the less harmful ones and leaving the more for reason, like for manufacturing reasons, right? That just might make the product better.
Yeah.
So it's also being aware of the impact of the different individual ones.
Right. And then like you
Uh,
mentioned earlier, like how do they all play together? Like,
yeah,
if you add, 2 plus 2 or 1 plus 1 might equal 10 in certain cases, just because how they interact, the
yeah,
explosive effect,
yeah. And
synergistic.
then also, yeah, and then also your ability to manage that from like in terms of like your detoxification genetics,
Yeah.
right? Like for me, none of my good glutathione genes are actually useful. I don't even think I have any of them,
I just
right?
saw a patient that like that, yeah, and she was like, the person that analyzed her genetics was like, if you had, there's like one bypass enzyme she makes, and they were like, if you didn't have that, you wouldn't be alive.
Yeah.
And obviously, our genes aren't dumb. Like our genes have been passed on through millions of generations. So that was perhaps beneficial or just a non consequence for her lineage. But
Mm-hmm.
now, because like you mentioned, it's been pretty recent that all of these chemicals are in our environment. And so now her genes are like, we didn't prepare for this. We needed all those glutathione genes.
Yeah, yeah, like the amount we haven't caught up
Yeah.
to the amount that's being pumped into our environment. And also, like what I was told was because of my ancestry, the food that we would have consumed would have been like a lot of green tea, a lot of like brassica, like more vegetables, and that would have allowed me to, thrive
Yeah.
with with less glutathione
Yeah.
ability.
Yeah, because jeans are heavy, like they carry real estate. So your body was like, oh, we don't need these.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
we live in the tropics. We don't need wool sweaters. And then all of a
Yes.
sudden there's like a snowstorm and they're like, what?
Yeah, yeah, and we're just, yeah, and now like I've moved, like my family has moved to North America, but also like the eating habits have kind of devolved worldwide anyway,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, luckily I am into green tea and I love vegetables, right? Like I actually do love vegetables, and I'm sad when I don't have them in my meal. So I can manage, right? And then like certain types of exercise were not recommended, but I do them anyway because I love them. Like I'm supposed to do more like yoga and meditation versus like more oxidizing things. Like I'm not supposed to be a marathon runner, which is fine because I am not a runner. um, but yeah, like there's certain things that you can kind of discern from what would optimize, what would be optimal for you in terms of, if you knew your genetic makeup.
Wait, it's a good point, right? Like how our practice, like if you hear like, well, running's good for you, and then you're like, why do I always feel terrible after a run? And it
Mm.
will you can kind of make sense of that through analyzing your genetics to be like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if my body's not very efficient at detoxifying, it's better to not stress it out too much with oxidative stress, which
Yeah.
exercise does to a benefit overall
Mm-hmm.
for most people, but maybe not for certain
Yeah.
types of people. And if you have a lot of oxidative stress in your environment just from like life.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Or you could use supplements to manage those particular, you could use your powers for good slash evil, right? To override that, right?
Yeah.
So for me, like knowing all these things is great because because I'm like, oh, okay, now we know the rules. How do we work around them?
Yeah, and it
Right?
helps also tailor your. So go ahead. Yeah, yeah. Like it helps to tailor your supplement. You're like, I'll just couch my run in resveratrol or
Yeah.
glutathione spray, and
Yeah.
now I can run the
Because
Boston Marathon. Yeah.
yeah, because like if that's something that brings you joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and you're aware of, you know, the potential consequences, which really aren't that terrible, right? Like, then, you know, there are workarounds, there are ways to buffer it with nutrition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I don't know if that's using our powers for good or evil, but
Right. Well, I did. Yeah, I mean, there's certain trade-offs. Like I was thinking yesterday, I did a 3-hour surf in cold water, not clean water. It's like one of the Great Lakes, and then 3-hour drive, like an hour and a half there, an hour and a half back. And is that good for me? I don't know. Like it's good in a sense, and it brings me tons of joy, and it's exercise, and like, but it's also just very lot of stressful activity, and then sitting, and there's this trade-off. So like nothing is ever purely good or purely evil, and I think supplements can kind of like help manage the evil so that we can live in the good. And yeah, I don't know if it's like I'm taking some like liver plants to like milk thistle to help me digest my Big Mac, but maybe, I mean, that's harm reduction, you know? It's like,
it is.
yeah.
But we also understand we can only get away with so much harm reduction, right? Like it's
Mhm.
yeah, and like knowing that, let's say, pomegranate juice or blueberry juice will reduce the amount of, like, will reduce how high your cholesterol goes up after a Big Mac. Does that mean I'm going to do that? No.
Mhm.
No, it does not, right? But doing something like, you know, marinating your, like if you're for barbecue season, like I think I was talking about something over in the summertime, where using certain herbs and like spices to marinate your meat will reduce the oxidation,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And then, you know, having, you know, maybe some pomegranate juice or like blueberry juice afterwards will also help to reduce, you know, the oxidative damage that can be caused by, you know, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that
That we
are,
just did at the
you
same
know,
time.
created when you are searing the meat that
Mhm.
is so delicious and, you know, brings a number of people, well, not anymore, but, you know, like is the reason for a social gathering,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
think, yeah, it's like rosemary and jerk spices.
yeah.
It like completely eliminates the negative of those things. And it's like, that's also why, this is like a totally other aside, but why nutrition studies where they're like, meat is bad because it has this, or like don't barbecue because it creates polyhydromatic or polyaromatic hydrocarbons.
Yeah.
It's like, but if you add rosemary to it, it kind of eliminates that. So a study that's looking at, you know, who is sick because they barbecue a lot isn't taking into account if they're marinating with rosemary
Mm-hmm.
or drinking pomegranate juice after. And
They're probably not.
yeah, yeah, they're like looking at like, maybe if you're lucky, do you smoke and do you exercise and do you eat lettuce? But
Yeah.
like, are you like, yeah, do you have a post pomegranate juice ritual after a barbecue? And like, it's really not part of the study criteria. Yeah, the
Can you
variables.
imagine showing up to like a Texas barbecue or something, being like, "Here, everyone, have some, you know, and it's good for you."
Yeah. Oh yeah. Every time. Why does she always bring pomegranate and blueberry salad after our barbecues?
Because I love you and I want you to live for a long time.
I'm
Eat all
trying to
this meat.
protect you. Yeah. It's my like barbecue condom.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, totally.
trying to keep us all healthy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like
Like,
these small things, right? It's like, and you're like, can I live with that? Can I live with eating blueberries after a barbecue? Yeah. And like jerk spices are delicious. So it's not, sometimes they're not big asks, you know, sometimes it's not, you have to rearrange your entire life. Sometimes it's just small, but it's knowing that and having someone help guide you, like
mhm.
with your patients. If your patient's like, Dr. Yu, I'm always having barbecue. What do I've read a study that says it'll kill me. And you're like, well, fear not, because there are these things called jerk spices or rosemary, and you can just sprinkle them on your meat and live to
Yeah.
see another barbecue day.
Possibly. Or you're like, why are you having so many barbecues? Why?
Yeah.
Barbecues?
Or,
You should not
or you start
be
to
eating this much meat.
yeah. You're like, or yeah, okay, well, let's sit down and reevaluate things. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Harm reduction and then also actually reducing the harm.
Yeah. Yes, on top of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, yeah, a lot of times I'll start with like the dirty dozen clean 15 for people because that's easily accessible.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it helps with like sometimes people can't buy everything organic. Either the grocery store doesn't have it all organic or it's outside of their budget. But I think that's a good one to start with for most people.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean,
And
there was a
then
study, I don't know, a few years ago being like, there's no point to organic. And I think they looked at just how many nutrients does it have? Like it
yeah,
wasn't, yeah. Yeah. Can you say, yeah,
I
yeah.
remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like so people don't understand, or maybe they forget that it takes resources to get rid of things that you don't want in your body. It takes resources to heal, right? So, and then if you continue to take in things that your body needs to get rid of, those are resources that aren't going towards optimizing,
Yeah.
right? So at that point, like, I mean, in an extreme case, at that point, your body's just keeping you alive,
Yeah.
right? Which is, I think in a lot of cases, especially like here in, well, I wouldn't say all of North America, but for us anyway, we can do a little bit better than that. And it's not really that hard
Yeah.
to do that, right? Like just these little things. And then as you make these little things part of your routine, you can add more little things because the first things that you added just become part of your life and you just don't even think about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just these little changes over time
Mm-hmm.
are better than no changes because you had to have everything perfect, which I think is an issue for a lot of people, or just being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's what ends up happening with my patients in terms of like doing their treatment plan or just certain lifestyle changes, is just having them come back and be like, okay, I knew I wasn't doing this, so I thought about canceling the appointment because I feel bad, but I decided not to. Or my patient's like, I didn't do this because whatever reason, and I hope you're not mad at me. And I'm just like, I'm not mad. Come on, like,
Mm-hmm.
me, I'm not mad.
Like just
Right?
say 12 Hail Marys and call me in the morning. Yeah, no, but but this is a great message. It's like, people, don't cancel your appointment because you didn't follow. Like, we're not going
Yeah.
to be mad at you. And actually, it's great because it helps us evaluate our plan,
Yeah.
and analyze on a deeper level. Like, is this not possible? Did you not feel equipped? Like, yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing. If someone comes in, they're like, I did nothing that you recommended, we can make it work for you, whoever's listening and
Yes.
contemplating
Yeah.
rebooking with either myself or Dr. Marillea. Book me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important because that sort of mindset or psychology is underlying in other things too, right? So if you can kind of, wherever it comes up, addressing it there, it may help in other areas too.
It's like the black and white logical fallacy of like, it doesn't have to be either black or white. It can be, you can like make strides in this area and then also feel like, I'm just going to let go of this other thing for
Mm-hmm.
now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Like there's just so many ways to approach, I guess, in environmental medicine.
Yeah.
I know we talked a lot about lifestyle things, but I'm finding that a lot of it is trying to keep people encouraged when they're trying to make these changes, because there's so much out there that is working against them when they try to make these changes, right? Like I talked about the messaging in the media, marketing, and just even having certain products available with the assumption that they're safe. Excuse me.
Yeah. Yes, here comes, thank goodness for the mason jar. But
Yeah, like if you think about what is actually involved in our decision making and trying to make certain changes, there's a lot that we have to overcome that we don't even realize, right? And I think we have to understand that and have a little bit more compassion for ourselves, because really the deck is stacked against us, right? There are certain systems that work better when we are overwhelmed and are not able to be like, hey, why is this like this, when maybe it should be either this or something that's not what it currently is, right?
Yeah, it's like not your fault that you don't know or that you didn't know.
Yeah, it's actually you're being, a lot of people like actively we may be kept ignorant on purpose, right? Or just be told to, like you said, why is this available for human consumption when there's something in here that is clearly not for human consumption? And a lot of people don't have the bandwidth to ask that question, right? Which is fine, because everyone's dealing with whatever they're dealing with. And I think that understanding gives us a lot of compassion, but that that kind of knowledge, really understanding that should allow us to give ourselves a lot of compassion too. Right? Like, okay, maybe you ate that thing, or maybe you didn't know that, it had that thing in it that you didn't want to consume because it was in tiny print. The print is so small on those, right? Like,
yeah.
Okay, so you can't, like, you don't need to throw out your whole routine now that you've worked so hard to build up to this point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we
Right?
can
And it's like,
work with it.
yeah, and like, what can you do? You can do a lot, right? And
that's, I think,
yeah, I
like a
think,
good. Sorry, sorry. I think it's a good take home as well. Like when we started off being like, is it all doom and gloom? And it's like, it is what it is, and we all feel how we feel in this moment, good or bad. And you can only, with this information, get better. Like knowing this, or being aware of it, or taking any steps is only going to make things better. So it's like you're not going to get worse by listening to this podcast. So yeah, it's like I'm just going to drink bleach. No, I think like just going to buy some like real scented shampoo or something to celebrate this hopelessness. No, but I think like, so you're like, it literally, even if you just like change your Wonder Bread for sourdough, that's all you do, that's better. It's better than doing nothing. So sorry, what were you going to say before I interrupted you?
No, that was, I don't remember. It's fine.
It
It was probably something like that, but yeah.
Probably important though. Just that's gone
I
forever.
feel like it is probably just a reiteration of other things, just a different way of saying a bunch of things that we've already said.
Which is good. It's like repeat yourself, what is it? Loudly and often.
Yeah.
I think it's Werner Herzog. I just may have completely misattributed that quote, but yeah. Repetition is the soul of understanding.
Yes. That sounds.
Here we go. Yeah. We just say the same thing in every podcast, and eventually the message will percolate throughout all society.
Yeah. And then just like rewording it in different ways so that it, like that whole like kind of tailoring the message depending on where people are at, but essentially providing, a consistent message. Right. Because at the end of the day, like my starting point is something very different from someone else's starting point. And sometimes I forget that because most of my friends are NDs, or they're in the health field and they're very health conscious. And then, like, that's why I like seeing patients, because it reminds me that, well, it just reminds me to like think differently again, right? Because when you're around your ND friends all the time, everyone's like, oh yes, well, organic and whatever, and like milk thistle and blah blah blah, and blueberry juice after your barbecues, right?
Yeah. Like,
And
what's the brand of blueberry juice you use after your barbecue?
Yeah, totally, right? That's totally how things, or we talk shop, right? And then people come in, they're like, oh, my stomach hurts. you know, and then you find out it's because they're eating, you know, bread all the time, like I'm bloated or whatever, and then you're like, oh, okay, right? And then yeah, it just kind of makes you think again. It just kind of like once again expands your perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and it's something like that. Those are some of the best cases if someone's just like, I didn't know. Like one of my colleagues and I were managing a family together from two different angles, and it was my colleague that did this, not I, but she recommended that the family just switch their corn oil and vegetable oil for avocado and olive oil. That's it in their cooking. One change. They just threw out the corn oil, did the exact same cooking practices with avocado for higher temperature and olive. And cholesterol went down across the entire family, blood glucose stabilized, like just crazy things happened. And they were just sort of like, yep, food tastes the same, just as easy to cook, slightly more expensive, but so is like Lipitor. So
yeah, Lipitor is like so bad for you.
Right. So
yeah. So that's amazing, right? Like something like that, it just kind of shows you, first of all, it shows you how little you may need to do, but also how problematic certain things are.
right.
You know?
Yeah, tomato. You're like
So that's like there's like two things right there, right? That are notable. Right? Like even people will be like, oh, my beef is corn fed, and I'm just like, okay. You're like, your corn is so omega like 6, and is it like non-GMO? And no one knows, no one cares.
nobody. Yeah, and
But
just had a conversation where the person was like, why do things say grass-fed beef? All cows eat grass. I'm like, no, that's how you remember the bass clef. It's not true. Yeah.
It is absolutely not true.
And like
From music class.
yeah, all cows eat grass. I'm like, except for the corn-fed ones, which are 99. I don't know. I actually know the number, but the majority are feedlot cows eating corn.
Yeah, and they have a sticker on it that proudly declares they're grass-fed. So people, or sorry, corn-fed. So people are like, oh, it's corn-fed, and I'm just like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then people are like, why are you buying that expensive meat? I'm like, because.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because I actually do notice the difference, but that's also because after you eat a certain way for a while, you notice things a little bit more. Like your taste buds have become a little bit more sensitive, at least in my case. But yeah, and then I find that I actually feel better.
Yeah, right. And then it starts to pay off. But yeah, and it's like it's sort of developed. But I think as well, like people expect that like you're going to eat one meal of grass-fed versus corn-fed and notice a difference, and it's not always going to show up like that. Like you get a stomach ache from one and not the other. But I think there is an expectation. A lot of people be like, I have all these digestive issues, but I haven't found the food that causes it. But it's often a delayed response, an accumulative response. So it's not so much about like, that can help having a food journal where you're like, oh, every time I eat popcorn, I feel terrible or something like that. But it often doesn't look like, it doesn't show up like that. It's like a slow, like it's kind of like slowly dripping water on your forehead. It's like not going to bother you the first few drops, but after 10 years, you'll have a hole in your head.
Yes.
It's very
or you'll go crazy, right? Or you'll just be so crazy because it's so annoying.
Yeah, the annoyance. Yeah, exactly. And then you stop the water and then it starts to heal and then you start dripping again and you're like, I can't even tolerate one. Why did you do that? You made me weaker.
Like actually no, but like I've had discussions with people about like, well, that you had some of that steak, was it grass fed? And I was like, no, but you made it for a special occasion and it was good. Well, did it matter? And I'm just like, well, no, I guess. Like I don't like, they're trying to, someone was trying to justify my preference for grass-fed steak or grass-fed beef, right? So there, there are challenges all over the place, right? So even like that whole, when you're saying, there's a label that says, okay, this is corn-fed beef, you're like, oh, they're saying it's corn-fed, it must be special in some way or remarkable, right? Or like people are like, oh, the rice has a gluten-free sticker on it, and you're just like, rice is gluten-free, right? And then like the corn chips have no cholesterol, and you're like, there is no cholesterol in plants.
No.
It's like, right? And
yeah, it's like gluten-free Skittles. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So people now think that these are healthier or whatever. They should be having these things as opposed to other things because it's been noted, in a large, colorful sticker.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like, it's like positive and negative marketing, right? Like not telling you stuff and then shoving other stuff in your face.
Yeah.
Right. And then the assumptions that come from that. Right. So that like, it's a lot of what we do is driven by marketing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like if you see something declared, like one person was like, oh, brown rice doesn't have gluten, but white rice does, right? I was like, no, like, so yeah, so it's just not understanding even what, and like most people probably don't even know what gluten is, right? So it's also like coming at that level of like, like actually there's a place in downtown Toronto called Urban Herbivore, and they make these delicious vegan sandwiches, and you pick your protein, and one of them is gluten, because it is a protein substitute, just hunks of gluten, the protein from wheat. And so you're like, oh, I thought that was good, I thought that was my vegan protein, now all of a sudden you're telling me it's gonna like cause gut inflammation or whatever. It's and also just like, are we trained to consider nutrition as part of health? I mean, we think that this is like a total tangent, but we think our medical doctors are sort of the wardens of our complete health, but medical doctors will be the first people to admit to you that they don't receive training in nutrition. And I was actually listening to a podcast that psychiatry residents from U of T create. It's a very interesting podcast, and they're interviewing a nutritional psychiatrist. And she was like, and they were like, well, they were saying, we don't learn nutrition. How are we supposed to tell patients how to eat well? And she's like, well, we help patients with things about like lifestyle all the time. Like if a patient has issues with finances, you can say something about that, about budgeting. So we can give them nutrition advice. And I'm like, I don't think the general public knows that your doctor, when they're giving you nutrition advice, is giving you sort of like car maintenance advice. It's like one of my grandmother was constipated and her doctor was like, eat all bran, that kind of thing. You're like, it's not, I mean, again, that's not what they do. They do a lot of great things, and they have to go, but they're not necessarily there to tell you what to eat, how to manage your healthier food. So it's like understanding who to go to for that information too,
Yeah, exactly. Like they're good at what they do, and that's not what they do.
You're right.
Unless they've done further, because some of them will, right? And which is great. But yeah, I think medical doctors are great. I have a friend who's a medical doctor.
Same. Yeah. The owner of my now ended clinic is a medical doctor. And she will tell you in med school there was no nutrition. She gave a lecture on nutrition, and I know there's another story here, but she owns a health food, like a local health food restaurant, and they were like, you didn't declare your biases. She's like, what do you mean? They're like, well, you have a conflict of interest because you own a restaurant that sells healthy food, so you have a conflict of interest because you have like an incentive to promote healthy food. So that's the landscape.
That's interesting.
But yeah,
like, did she laugh? Because
she was just like confused. She was like, what do you, but healthy food. But this is the thing. It's like not everybody's coming at it, which is to the point of the marketing thing of like, not everyone's coming at it with this idea that health is an important factor in food choices. And it sounds ridiculous because we're in this culture, like you said, like most of your friends are NDs. Most of my friends are NDs or have heard me go on and on about stuff. So one of our major decision-making factors when we decide what to eat is health. In addition to convenience, taste, preference, our fit friends and whatever. but not everybody has that, you know. A lot of people, it's like doesn't even factor in at all, which sounds very funny, but it's I think a reality for a lot of people because they just haven't been trained to consider it that way. And we can go on and on about that, I'm sure.
Oh, for sure. Yes, we could. Yeah.
Marillea, I want to like open up like any last thoughts as we've like weaved and winded through this chemical soup
Yeah.
information.
No, I don't think so. I think it just, I hope that you're not left feeling all doomy and gloomy, but it's an interesting field, but it's so necessary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And um, I think that we need to look at things with a wider scope, because a lot of the issues that we have, especially like health issues, occur in a bigger system.
Yeah.
Right, where like we're just trying to manage specific points in the system, where the system is not working for us.
Yeah.
Right, so that needs to be addressed. And in a lot of cases, like our health is not great because of these, exposures. We don't live close to any of these exposures. There are some places where this is directly like into their water, into their soil, into every aspect of their life. So I think like, that part of it for me is really, really kind of top of mind for me right now. In addition to clearly like the health effects of a lot of what's like what we're managing in environmental medicine. So I think that if we were able to kind of figure out how to work together on that and push for changes, that would benefit all of us. I think that, the whole environmental medicine thing would be less doom and gloom.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that there's a lot that we can actually do with just, realizing and understanding that.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I said, giving yourself a break.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, it's like our health is not solely our responsibility. There's that as well. It's like we're in a wider context, and we can't live in a bubble.
No.
But even the evil CEO at the top of like the puppeteer, like in like let's say there's like this evil organization that just throws chemicals into the environment. That person's still a human being that is affected by these chemicals as much as anyone else. Maybe they're not in direct line of exposure, like certain people who live in certain communities or countries, or or people with certain genetics. But that person ultimately, and their grandchildren, their great grandchildren, are going to be affected. So there should be an incentive for everyone to clean the world, you would think.
Yeah. But
someday.
Yeah. I mean, but also certain people in certain situations have a lot more resources to buffer themselves.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. So it may not have to be their personal particular problem anytime soon.
Like they can move to Mars.
Yeah.
Inject young blood or something, and like
right. Yeah. So I mean, there's there's a lot. I think the whole environmental medicine is a lot more. There's a lot more to it than just the medicine part of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like picking up garbage at the beach. Like you're not going to solve all the problems of like what put the garbage there, but there's like some, and there's going to be more garbage tomorrow, but it's like small steps that you can feel good about that make a difference. I think maybe that's the key of avoiding the doom and gloom, and it's making me feel less doomy and gloomy to think like that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and like even with the whole garbage issue that you just illustrated, like we can pick up the garbage, we can put more garbage cans, we can have legislation at the same time, and we can create things that if they happen to end up on the ground are going to biodegrade safely. Right. There are many ways to approach that particular issue all at the same time.
And
right? We don't have to wait.
And like also like the majority of people that go to the beach, enjoy the beach, also hold the same value that they don't want garbage on the beach. The majority doesn't mean that there are people that are just tossing garbage, but knowing that like most of, there is a community around wanting to preserve this is also, we don't have to do it alone too, so when it comes to environmental toxicities, it's like, yeah, maybe my local grocery store is starting to have more organic food because they know that that's what we want.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. It makes it so much easier if your local grocery store has the polysorbate 60 free coconut milk.
Yeah. And then people in the community will continue to, they'll be like, oh, they have it here, great, right? So it's all about like, having the community that wants to do this, which can occur at various levels, as well as knowing that we could manage certain things, either from a social aspect or even from health, right? Like we're not usually like, okay, just do this one thing and then do this one thing. We're like, okay, we're going to do this from this angle. We're going to manage this part from this angle, because to be dealt with effectively, certain things need to be managed at the same time, and they can be, right? So yeah,
this is great. I loved this conversation. It was so much fun. Yeah,
it was really fun.
I know we went over, but it was so good. And thanks so much for taking your Monday to talk to me.
Oh, no. Great. Yeah. No, thank you for having me. I really like this.
This is great. I'm going to have links for people to follow you on Instagram, your website, up on the show notes. Anything you're offering, or like, where can we find you?
So right now I'm still seeing patients. I'm remotely with Enviromed in Toronto. So that's on my website, and I think there's a link with my Instagram. So I'm still seeing patients there. And yeah, that's pretty much it for now. I'm still trying to figure out how to make environmental medicine less doomy and less gloomy. And just, providing people with information. So yeah, that's about it for now.
Great. All right, this is great. So we'll have, people can follow you and find you, and we'll put all those links up. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me.